We're in a series called The World of Jesus, and we're just kind of looking at some of the world in which Jesus taught in, some of the culture that he taught in. We started off last week with new expectations, how he kind of had to change some of the language around what he was teaching. And this week, I want to start off with a place. Here's a picture of it as it looks, well, today. Don't have any pictures of it, when Jesus was here. You can probably hopefully see the cave there in the middle. There's a huge cave. There's a spring that's just in front of it. This is actually in southern Syria. It's in the Golan Heights. Mount Hermon is right behind it there, so it's kind of a rock face into Mount Hermon. And back in the day, Caesarea Philippi. So whenever we're reading in the Bible, we see Caesarea Philippi. Caesarea Philippi was very close to this. This was just outside the gates of the city. However, originally it didn't look like this. In Jesus' day, it didn't look like this. If we were able to go back 2,000 years, we would know. First thing we would notice is that the spring, which is in front of the cave, used to be in the cave. An earthquake moved it. So back when Jesus was teaching, all this water would have actually been coming out of the mouth of that cave you see just behind it. The cave was dedicated to the god Pan, god of wilderness and wild animals and shepherds. And so this was often called the Cave of Pan. And then the spring is the spring of Banias, and it flows into the Banias River. You can kind of see the starting of it here. And the Banias River actually flows into the northern Jordan. So it's one of the major tributaries coming into the Jordan River, which flows down into the Sea of Galilee and then down into the Dead Sea. The significance of it is that Jesus did a very important teaching right in front of this place, in front of this spring. Like I said, it was called the Cave of Pan. It was also called the Cave of Moloch, according to some, because children were sacrificed by throwing them into the water inside the cave. And the idea was that this water that was inside the cave was this eternal pool that just kept on. Just imagine a spring that, we're talking 2,000 years ago. The spring is still giving water, and it has for thousands of years. Nobody knew back in the day that Jesus was here. Nobody understood that, what was going on. They just knew that there was this cave and that water seemed to just continue to pour out of this cave. And so children would be drowned, apparently, in the mouth of this cave. So if you can imagine Jesus coming to Caesarea Philippi and beginning to teach in front of this cave. There's something else that's significant, but to get to it, I actually have to go back to Job. So if you let me just read a passage from Job. Here's what Job says. The dead are in deep anguish, those beneath the waters and all that live in them. It's the realm of the dead. The realm of the dead is naked before God. Destruction lies uncovered. And theologians have argued over this verse for probably since Job was alive, wondering what he was talking about here. But where they all keep coming back to is that in ancient times, water was chaos. Whenever you went out on a boat in the water, it was acknowledged that you were taking your life in your hands because the water could not be controlled. In the Sea of Galilee, you could start off on a nice, beautiful day, get halfway across the lake, and a storm would come up and sink you. So water was uncontrollable chaos. And sometimes that became the symbol for hell. We think of it most often as fire. But some, in ancient times, thought of hell as the chaos of water. So if you could imagine this cave of Pan, back in the day of Jesus, with this spring that is coming out of the cave, you can imagine what Jesus and some of the other people that lived in that day would call it. It was the gates of hell. So as Jesus comes to Caesarea Philippi, he's going to give us a significant teaching right in front of the gates of hell. This is a bit of a map. You can see the pin just up there. That's where Caesarea Philippi is. That's where the gates of hell is. Then you can see the Jordan River that comes down into Lake Hula, which is a lesser lake, and then you can see the Sea of Galilee at the bottom of the map. But Jesus, for this teaching, is right up there at where the pin is. Just let me read the beginning of this story. When Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say the Son of Man is?" And they replied, "Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, still others Jeremiah or one of the prophets." "But what about you?" he asked. "Who do you say that I am?" And Simon Peter answered, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." That first blank, if you're trying to keep it, is keep notes, is who is Jesus? It's a question that we all have to answer, and probably repeatedly. Who is Jesus to you? Maybe sometimes it's a harder question. We probably have an answer. We probably have Peter's answer on the tip of our tongue, but sometimes living like that is true is quite a different thing, and we have to keep on asking ourselves, so who is it that we really think that Jesus is? As I was studying this week, I actually went back to a series that I did over a decade ago called The Star, the Cross, and the Crescent. And we looked at Judaism, Christianity, and Islam in over 3 weeks as the Abrahamic religions. And the one thing is, as I was reading through the Abrahamic religions, was that I began to, again, confirm that the conflict between us is a sibling rivalry. All three faiths believe that they go back to Abraham. And it would be easy sometimes to find the beginnings of these faiths in the lives of certain people. So probably the easy one for Judaism is to say that it goes back to Moses, the one who led them out of Egypt, who, with the help of God, brought the 10 plagues on Egypt, and then led them into the wilderness, and led them through 40 years in the wilderness, gave them the law, the 10 commandments, until finally they were ready to cross over the Jordan River and take the land. So Judaism maybe begins with Moses. For Christians, well, of course, we believe we begin with Jesus, don't we? So the New Testament, we go to the New Testament, the birth of Jesus in a manger, the story of the wise men and the shepherds and the angels, and the news that the Messiah had come, his dedication at the temple. All of this is kind of the early stages of Christianity. We don't have a Bible place to go for the beginning of Islam, but we would say it's probably in the 7th or 8th century with the life of Muhammad, who came and, again, unified a people that was not earlier unified, and gave them a book in which they could celebrate. But I would say that we are actually looking too late for each one of them. I think the beginnings of each one of these faiths is in the Bible. For the Jews, I think we need to be careful not to look at just Moses, but to go back to Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. This is the beginning of Judaism. This is the only God. You can call him what you want to call him, but he is the God who exists as he would describe himself to Moses. He is the God who comes and creates us, creates everything that we see. We call him Yahweh or Elohim. Personally, I like Elohim because it's plural. And as a Christian, I believe that God exists as Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. So Elohim kind of fits that kind of wording. But this is the real beginning of Judaism as God creates the world. And on the seventh day, he rests. And his people would follow that for generations, resting on the seventh day. For Christianity, I'm going to skip over some stuff here, but I promise I will come back. I would go to Genesis chapter 3. So the Lord God said to the serpent, because you have done this, cursed are you above all livestock and all wild animals. You will crawl on your belly, and you will eat dust all the days of your life. And I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and hers, and he will crush your head, and you will strike his heel. This is the beginning of Christianity. This is the first gospel. That someone would come who would be in battle with Satan over our souls. And we find this hint here that there would be someone who would come who would be an offspring of the woman. Interesting language. But Jesus would come being born of Mary and the Holy Spirit. The beginnings of Christianity. For the beginnings of Islam, I think we have to look at Genesis 21. Genesis 21 tells a story of Hagar being kicked out of the house of Abraham. Sarah has had enough of her. And so she kicks Hagar and her son Ishmael out into the desert. And the two of them run to the desert, and they start to pray to a God that they do not know. And Abraham comes from the home, and he gives food and water to Hagar. But God promises that he would be with her and her son Ishmael. And time passes, and the descendants of Ishmael remain in the desert. At the time of Jesus, they were a loosely connected tribes, often at war with each other. They knew how to survive in the deserts. And they knew that there was a rumor, but they didn't know exactly what it was. There was this rumor that their lives went back to Abraham and Abraham's son. And there was the suggestion that this desert people were the descendants of Abraham and of Ishmael. But they remained in the wilderness. Said I'd go back. There's 4 major things that happen to these faiths in about 600 years before, 200 years before, about 400 years after the birth and death and resurrection of Jesus. Here they are. The first one is that the Jews received their book. We think of the Old Testament as always being there, but the truth is it wasn't. It was a loosely connected group of books that the people read of these books, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, the Torah were the most important. And so the young man would study the Torah, and they would know the Torah. But on top of the Torah, there was other books that were written by prophets. There were some histories. There were some things written very late in the period by some of the priests. And this loose connection of books was what they believed was leading them towards God. But somewhere a couple hundred years before Jesus was born, they started to wonder about pulling these books together. The great convocation, the great gathering of religious leaders came and started to argue about which books should be included in a Hebrew Bible and which ones should be omitted. And we don't have a good idea on when this was settled, but it was settled probably somewhere right about the time of Jesus' birth, when they finally came and said, okay, we've got the Hebrew Bible. This is the authorized text that the Jewish people can read and will give them faith to follow God, the God who created them in the very beginning. So the first thing that happened was that the Jews received their book. The second thing was that the Christians received their book. We didn't take as long. Probably because we knew that Judaism had just gone through this process, the Christians started to come together and started to talk about which books should be included. And there's a lot of things out there that is false about this whole idea. Number one was Dan Brown's suggestion that this all happened at the Council of Nicaea. It didn't. I just want to say this, and I hope you won't misunderstand me. Dan Brown is a great writer of fiction. But that's it. What he writes is fiction. If you want to read Dan Brown books, great. I've read a few of them. I think they're phenomenal, but they aren't truth. He's got some loosely connected ideas that really don't work, but he weaves them into a very good story. So, this didn't happen at the Council of Nicaea. It had actually started happening 150 years before the Council of Nicaea, as people came together and decided which books of the Bible, of the New Testament, should be included. And there was arguments, as there is in any discussion. There was books that people had fallen in love with that the priests weren't sure that should be included. One of them was the book of Hebrews, and it did get included. Partially because the people loved the book. But there was a lot of letters that were written back and forth between these leaders, and they would suggest these books, and some would suggest these books, and it finally came out. The first time we see a list of books of the New Testament with nothing that should not be there. All the books included with nothing that is not in our Bibles. The first time that list shows up is in an Easter letter in the 300s, I think around 367, by Athanasius. And he writes in this Easter letter, this is the books that he thinks should be included. And they are identical to the books that we have in our Bibles. So 330 years after the death and resurrection of Jesus, the Christians get their book. So the Jews have a book. The Christians have a book. The next thing that happened, and this is not necessarily a good thing, is that the third major event was that Christianity became a national religion. That happened a little earlier than us getting our book, actually, around 325 in the reign of Constantine. And Constantine made Christianity the religion of the empire. And as I said, we're still not sure that was a good thing to do. But that's what happened. We became a national religion. just as Judaism had been for the Jews. For the Roman Empire, that was Christianity. And our behavior changed. And some things happened that probably shouldn't have happened. But it became a reality. The fourth event was actually a non-event. The fourth event of this time was that the Arabs were totally left out of the process. So we have this group of people who are discovering that maybe they are the descendants of Ishmael, but they were left totally out of this process. Along comes Muhammad, and Muhammad starts to pray to God that his people who are warring and they are not connected and there is no unity would have something that would connect them. And he prays that his people would have a book just like the Christians and the Jews. And in some ways, the Quran is seen as the fulfilling of that promise. I'm not saying that it is. I'm just saying that would be the way that Islam would interpret what is happening here. So we have these three faiths, and each one of them is asked the question, who is Jesus? For the Jews, the answer was that he was a misguided martyr. Maybe he was insane. He thought he had delusions of grandeur. He thought he was somebody that he was not. For Islam, if you ask them who Jesus is, they will tell you he's the great prophet. He is second only to Muhammad as far as prophets go. He was a wise man. He was a man who did great things in the area of Judea 2,000 years ago. They believed that Jesus was born of Mary and the Holy Spirit. What they don't believe is that he is God. And so Christianity keeps on getting asked this question. Who is Jesus? It was a question that Jesus asked of his disciples in Caesarea Philippi. Let me read something that is called the Holy or the Trilemma of C.S. Lewis, and you probably heard it before, but just let me read this to you again. This is probably where our faith as Christians should be. Listen to what C.S. Lewis writes. I'm trying here to prevent anyone saying the really foolish thing that people often say about him. I'm ready to accept Jesus as a great moral teacher, but I don't accept his claim to be God. That is the one thing we must not say. A man who was merely a man and said the sort of things Jesus said would not be a great moral teacher. He would either be a lunatic on the level with a man who says he is a poached egg, or else he would be the devil of hell. You must make your choice. Either this man was and is the Son of God, or else a madman, or something worse. You can shut him up for a fool. You can spit at him and kill him as a demon, or you can fall at his feet and call him Lord and God. But let's not come with any patronizing nonsense about this being a great human teacher. He has not left that open to us. He did not intend to. For C.S. Lewis, as Christians, we have one choice, and that is to echo Peter's confession. Yes, Lord, you are the Son of the living God. Jesus didn't leave the path open for us to take what Islam believes, that he was a great moral teacher. He wasn't. If he was not the Son of God, then everything that he said is suspect. And as Christians, we need to understand that. Let me continue in Matthew. Jesus replied, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but by my Father in heaven. And I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church." Probably, I don't know, 20 years ago now, I'm getting old, a friend of mine was preaching a sermon. He was just starting out in his theological learnings, and so this is one of his first sermons, and he preached it on this passage. And he preached well enough that I still remember 20 years later what he was talking about. But he had some Catholic leanings, and when he came to the question of, "On this rock I will build my church," he leaned toward the idea that Peter was the rock and that God was building his church on Peter. I said he had some Catholic leanings because this is basically where we get the idea of a pope from. The pope is the spiritual descendant of Peter, who God said on this, or Jesus said, "On this rock I will build my church." So as we watch the popes, and there have been good popes, there have been bad popes. I think during my lifetime I've seen some of the good ones. I've read a lot about some of the bad ones. But the idea is that the Pope, the Bishop of Rome, is the rock. That the church is built on this man who is a spiritual descendant of Peter. The problem with that, as far as I'm concerned, is that I wasn't quite sure that's what Jesus meant. What did Peter say? "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." Is it possible that that confession is what the church is built on? Not Peter. I mean, Peter was a good guy, but he made a lot of mistakes. And his spiritual descendants, the popes, done some good things, but they've made a lot of mistakes. They're human just like us. So, did Jesus say that he would build his church on a person, on Peter? Or did he say that he would build it on a confession? "You are the Christ, the Messiah, the Son of the living God." And I lean back towards that second, that it was built on the confession that he was the Christ, the Son of the living God. Now, here's where I tell you something else. I think I'm wrong. I think the Catholic Church is wrong. I think I'm wrong. How can that be, you ask? I'm not sure that either one of them are enough. I think maybe the church is built on the confession of Peter. "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God," as it is spoken and clung to by people, by Christians. It's not enough just to say that Jesus is the Christ. We have to believe it. We have to be willing to organize our thoughts and our actions according to the confession that Jesus Christ is the Son of the living God. And if we're not willing to do that, then the church cannot be built. It needs both the person and the confession. And sometimes we're good at this, and sometimes we're not. God, I trust you when you're blessing me. But when I'm in trial, I'm not sure. Isn't there something else that I need to be doing? I was looking at Job, now I'm looking kind of at Genesis in my devotional time I blog on. And it is part of the story of Abraham. Abraham does really well when God is blessing him. But as soon as he starts to walk into a trial, he seems to fade a little bit. Remember when he went to Gerar, the city of the Philistines? He met Abimelech, the king, and Abraham said, you know what, Sarah? You're a beautiful woman. I think I'm going to tell them you're my sister. Now, they were kind of related a long ways apart. But Abraham didn't seem to have enough trust that God could keep them safe in this foreign city where there was a king who Abraham says does not believe in God. The reality was that Abimelech, the king, believed in many gods. And it was Abraham that was having the faith struggle. He wasn't sure that his God was big enough to protect him and Sarah. And so he lied. And rather than looking down on Abraham for this story, I think we often need to look into our own lives and think of all the times that we have done the exact same thing. God, when you're blessing me, you are the Son of God. But when I'm struggling, I'm not sure. At least my actions don't betray that I am sure. It's not Peter versus the confession of Peter. It's that we all need to have the confession of Peter as we live out our lives. Not just on Sunday, but on Monday to Saturday as well. Trusting that God is with us, that Jesus was the Son of God, and regardless of what's going on, we can trust him to help us. One last little verse before we say goodbye to this passage. And the gates of Hades will not overcome it. The hope of the world. Remind you what we read earlier. And Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, and he asked his disciples, who do people say the Son of Man is? He came to the area of Caesarea Philippi, where the gates of hell was, and said, who do they say I am? Am I big enough to stand up against the gates of hell? Do you believe that I am strong enough as my disciples? Am I strong enough to stand in front of the gates of hell and know that the gates of hell will not overcome me? Or does all of this scare you just a little bit too much? And Jesus isn't saying that we're not going to have to confront trouble. The gates of hell was right there when he was making this teaching. We have a struggle with Jesus a little bit. We see his teaching. Sometimes we don't quite understand it. Sometimes we do understand it and we make it into a ritual. But often we don't let the teaching come and influence who we are. So if we were in Caesarea Philippi and we had this gate, this cave of Pan, and this spring, this eternal water was coming out of this place, and we know that this has been the place of sacrifice, what would we say about Jesus? His words are to Peter, if you are willing to live that confession, that I am the Christ, the Son of the living God, you will build something that not even the gates of hell, which is right there, will overcome. If you are willing. And I think he's making the same promise to us. In John, Jesus tells his disciples this: I have told you these things so that in me you may have peace. In this world you will have trouble, but take heart. I have overcome the world. It doesn't matter where you are. It doesn't matter if you're standing in front of the gates of hell. It doesn't matter the circumstances in your life. I, Jesus, am big enough to overcome whatever comes on you. I may not do it the way that you would like me to do it. I may not do it in a timing that is appropriate for you. But I will do it. If we are willing to live out that confession. And that's kind of where we need to leave this teaching, because it's not something that I can tell you what to do. It's something that we each have to decide whether this is something that we can do. Father, yes, I believe that you are the Son of the living God. I believe that you are Elohim, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. I believe that you are at work in this world. I believe that you are enough, that I don't need more. God, I believe all of this. But sometimes it's hard for me to live it out. And I think maybe our prayer needs to be every morning when we get up is just simply, Father, I confess. You sent Jesus to teach us to be who you sent him to be, your Son, the Son of the living God. And God, somehow in this place that you are going to place me today, I want to live out that fact. I don't know what that looks like. Maybe it just means that when somebody criticizes me, I will realize that there's somebody on my side that is bigger than they are. Maybe it's just when we get into interpersonal relationships and somebody gets me mad, that I'm going to understand that you love them as much as you love me, and that you're big enough for this situation. Maybe when it comes to something that I don't know, God, you will give me the courage to ask a question. But let me live out my life as if I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. And that through that confession, this world will be made just a little better. A little bit more like your kingdom. That you will be the center of everything that I do. God, that's my prayer. Let me pray. Father, we thank you that you are, we believe with our hearts, the Messiah, the Christ, the Son of the living God. And we believe that not even the gates of hell can overcome that confession. But what we ask of you right now is that you would come and inhabit us with your Spirit, and that you would help us to live out that confession so that the world knows whose we are. That, Father, they might ridicule us, but we know that you are bigger than anything that they can throw at us. God, right now, I just want to pray for the relationships that we are in as a church. And I just want to ask you to bless those relationships. That, God, you would give us a forgiving heart that cries out that we are becoming more and more like you, the Messiah, the Son of the living God. And that you have dominion over even these relationships. God, I pray for husbands and wives and ask that you would bless their relationships. And that we would realize that the Son of the living God is bigger even than the troubles and trials that come in our marriages. God, help us to leave everything with you. And may that confession be on our lips as long as we live. Help us make this commitment to you every day, every hour, that we will live out that confession that you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. We pray this in the name of Jesus. Amen. You are good, and your love endures. You are good, and your love endures. You are good, and your love endures. Today, you are good, and your love endures. You are good, and your love endures. You are good, and your love endures. Today, you are good, and your love